Please join me in welcoming Environment Division Director Ken Jock.
Sego Guego, Yonyeto Lolo Youngets, Bogata Yoni, Louise Londegets ne Laganistaha, Daniel Lawayats ne Lagane Goha, Jock ne Guajale. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. I had to practice that a little bit, but I wanted to thank Carol LaFrance in the Mohawk language course for that also. My name is Ken Jock. I'm the Environment Division Director for the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe. And as Brendan mentioned, I've been there a few years. Started out kind of humble beginnings, but I started out, I guess, as a Superfund kind of a technician. I'm going to switch microphones. I'd like to move around a little more, I guess, but I wanted to start out talking about what happened after Henry talked about the geology of the area and how the St. Lawrence River was created. And it was, as many people in our community know or talked about, it was a beautiful river. I mean, it was why Akwesasne was called Akwesasne. And it was a very productive river. In 1950s, the mid-1950s, the St. Lawrence Seaway was created and the power dam was put there to produce cheap power. And it basically changed this whole community forever. I think that was one of the most significant environmental occurrences that this community has experienced. We basically had cheap electric power, hydropower, that was created so that industry could locate here. And we had General Motors and Reynolds Aluminum come here because of the cheap power. What do we have here now? We have a little bit of history of the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe Environment Division. It was, the mission statement is to assist the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe community in preserving, sustaining, protecting, and enhancing the environment for future generations. We have one of our early technicians, Mark Martin, and was doing some surveying for us of the water system. As Brendan said in the beginning, we were part of the Indian Health Services, and our primary goal was to just try to install sewage and water systems to make sure that the drinking water was safe, and also to help with the operation of the water treatment plant. It was only in the mid-1980s that people realized that there was an environmental contamination problem. And Gudgy Cook had learned of this New York State DEC wildlife pathologist and some of the work that he had done throughout the state, looking at discovering and investigating environmental contamination. So she invited Dr. Ward Stone up in the mid-1980s, and he started doing some sampling of the wildlife and the fish in the area. He started to see that there were some problems with PCBs, with toxic chemicals that were actually being detected in fish and wildlife. This is at the General Motors site. This is where the first focus was. In 1987, EPA ordered General Motors to do 3 studies: the breast milk study, the fish study, and the mammal study. And basically those studies documented what most people already had suspected, is that there was contamination throughout the fish, the water, the wildlife, and now in the women's breast milk. And so I guess the next phase of the program and the department, I guess you can go to the next slide, Peter. The next phase of it was trying to get an idea of what does that mean, what were PCBs, what kind of health impacts could they have, what did it mean to the fish and the wildlife, and to the people of the community. This is kind of a larger picture of the area. You can see how the power dam just cut the river in half. It's right here. And there's another dam right here, the Long Sault Dam. And there's the locks right here. So basically, it cut that whole river system right in half. It created a lake over here, and this river was not flowing freely either. It was being controlled by the locks and the dam. The industries were right here. This is Renault's, this is General Motors. This is the reservation line right next door, as we all know. It's right on their doorstep. Alcoa is right also here in this area. Yes, Peter mentioned also Domtar, which is right here. Cordall's further down here. And I think there's a chemical factory there. CIL, right, Henry? Yeah. So we had a lot of industry right in the area. Some of the impacts, there was a whole mixture of chemicals, PCBs, dioxins, polyaromatic hydrocarbons, phenols, volatile organics, fluorides, heavy metals. People in the area, fishermen and trappers, were noticing the otters and minks had vanished in the area. They were not being found anymore. The fish, there was a fish consumption advisory put in place because of the contamination. People were told not to eat any fish at all if you were of a certain age, or if you were of childbearing age, as far as women and children less than 16 years old were told not to consume any fish at all. People were told to stop planting their gardens, picking local medicine plants. Like I said, Agudji brought Wartstone up, and after that it was a series of studies to try to document what was going on. Go to the next slide. I forgot to mention that I graduated from St. Lawrence University, I think it was 74, I think. It's been a little while. And with a biology degree, and my intent was to spend my career out in a park or in the forest studying the natural world. I was working in a national park in Canada in 76, 77, no, excuse me, 86, 87, and I came across the bridge, and this is what I saw. You know, this is Reynolds in those days in 87, 88. It's just gray, just a huge cloud coming from that factory. And I said, you know, I would really like to do something to help my community, to help to do, and as it happened, I was able to get a job. Randy Hart hired me to get it, to help out, to get an idea of the contamination. So that was one of the things that we did in, we sued Reynolds Metals for, under the Clean Air Act, you can sue them for visible emissions, and that's a pretty visible emission. And so we threatened to sue them. we were able to get them to put in the state-of-the-art dry and wet scrubber system. And also to create an education fund for the tribe. It's really important, I think, to try to encourage and provide the resources for students that are going to school. That's one of the limiting factors, I guess, with being able to go to school. And so we were able to put $2 million into an education fund to try to start the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe Education Fund. At this time, they were emitting about 400 pounds of fluoride per hour from their smokestacks. That's just a terrible amount of contamination right across from Cornwall Island directly. And like Henry said, it was having a devastating effect on the cattle. What's the next slide? Still with Reynolds, EPA came in. Their contamination was not just in the air, they were also dumping into the river. It was coming right out of a discharge directly from the plant into the river, and this whole area that's inside of that steel wall was contaminated, all of the sediments. Now they did this dredging in 2009. But they actually did a fairly good job because they did put this wall here, and they were able to contain all of the material that they tried to scoop out of the river, and that was shipped off site. Now the plant closed in 2014, actually, I think it was before that. But anyway, I'm looking at Brendan, he's looking back at me like, I don't know. Yeah, it's a test, yes. The thing with Reynolds is it is shut down, and that's good for air emissions. It's good because they're not continuing to dump fluorides. But there's also a huge plant there, and there's a lot of contamination that still remains in that site. So that's part of what we need to look at in the future is, now that that plant is like shut down and decommissioned, there's a lot of investigation that still needs to be done to be sure that we find all of the dump sites basically that could have occurred on that plant site. So although the river has been cleaned up, there's still a bit of work to be done on site, and we have to try to make sure that it gets done. We have to work with the New York State DEC, and they're in Watertown, and they kind of have a hard time making their way up this far. We're the furthest away from them, so they stay in Watertown, and so we have to make sure that they don't forget about us here. Go to the next slide. Okay, Alcoa West, it's called, in Messina. It's been there since 1903. I guess it was originally a military factory. It produced aluminum for the war effort. This is the newer part in the front. In the back there is the old original factory. In the mid-1980s is when they also were discovered that they used PCBs in their factory, and they disposed of them. They leaked and they dumped them basically all over their land. They were issued a record of decision in '91 to clean 8 different sites on their area that they had used as dump sites. There is, I guess the same thing happened here that happened at General Motors and happened at Reynolds is they would have settling basins, but they had leaks, and all of the PCBs eventually found their way into the river because everything drained off from their property and went into the river. So the Grass River has been basically the receptor of their contamination for the last 60 or 70 years. That is the last major cleanup that we have to deal with in the river system. There's about 7 miles of the Grass River that's contaminated with PCBs and the sediment. They're working on the design. There's going to be dredging and capping, which we have opposed as far as the tribe has said that capping is not a remedy. That we need to dredge this contamination. So we're still pushing to have as much dredging done on Grass River as can get done. Go to the next slide. Okay, I think most people would recognize this slide, this picture. There's Loran's Marina and Apartments right here. This is what was called Contaminant Cove. The General Motors dump is right here. It's basically right on the edge of the borderline, and some people will say it's actually on Mohawk territory. And they, again, used PCBs, and they had leakages. In 1978, there was a berm that had sludge with PCB contamination. That berm broke, and the sludge came onto the territory, onto the Thompson property. And they was put on a Superfund site in the mid-1980s, national priority list, and from there on they did a bunch of interim measures. One of the things they did is in 1987, 88, they put a temporary cap on the dump, and only took about 30 years for a permanent cap to be put on. But the thing with the industrial landfill, as they call it, but we call it the dump, is that there's no lining on that, on the bottom of it. It's right on the bank of the river, and it's also on the boundary of the territory. And the Sandwich Mohawk tribe has always opposed leaving it there, and they still maintain that that entire dump waste needs to be removed. It's a long-term battle, and that's one of the things that we learned. I guess you kind of do get a historical perspective. I've been working on this for 30 years, and you have to have a long-term outlook on things. Some of the times these things do take a generation or two to get remedied, to get taken care of. But I know this community is not going to forget about that. We're not going to give up as far as making sure that that is really finally cleaned up. And I think that's one of the lessons that we need to teach our children, is that this is something that we're doing for them, but also they're doing for their children. And that we really can't give up hope. And I think this existing council right now, tribal council, is still going to Washington to lobby, and they're still pushing for the cleanup of this dump. Other than the dump, most of the other waste sites on this property have been cleaned up. They've been dug out, they've been shipped off site. There's only one spot left, actually, other than the dump, that needs to be cleaned up, and that's a lagoon. It's a 10 million gallon lagoon, and that should be done this year. So after that, most of the site is clean. One thing also I wanted to mention is in 2009, General Motors filed for bankruptcy throughout the country. They had a tremendous amount of liability, environmental liability. They had contaminated areas throughout the country, this was probably the worst site in the country as far as their contamination. In 2009, the Treasury Department basically said, okay, you can go your way. We're going to create a separate entity that's going to take all of those contaminated sites. It's not even going to be General Motors' property or problem anymore. It's going to be Racer Trust. So they basically relieved General Motors of that liability. They put a certain amount of money in for cleaning up all of the contamination that General Motors had created in the whole country, and that was the result of the bankruptcy proceeding. So General Motors is still operating. I guess they were deemed to be too big of a company to fail, apparently. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, just wanted to kind of summarize by talking about the Environment Division as it is today. Presently, we have 56 full-time staff, including 24 Akwesasne Cultural Restoration Program staff. We also have summer interns and seasonal technicians, and that's one of the things that we really encourage and we would really like to see is our young students work with us. And any kind of, if there's any kind of interest, whether it's forestry, brownfields, air quality, water quality, solid waste management, Superfund, the water resources. We have also a new program, the agriculture program, and we have a couple of projects. Wally Ransom is doing a great job. He's working on the egg project, Mother Earth Eggs, with the students, 8 students that are producing eggs, very healthy diet. That's part of what the Akwesasne Cultural Restoration Program and the egg program are trying to promote is food sovereignty, food self-sufficiency, healthy diet, and healthy lifestyle. We think that that's part of what Henry talked about and Brendan. It's traditional ecological knowledge. All it is really is looking at the way that we used to live and trying to bring that back. There's some people that are still living that way, and that's hopefully the people that we can learn from, and also that the younger children can learn from. Removing the Huggensburg Dam this past year, that was one of the initiatives to try to, again, restore the environment, restore some of the traditional practices. We can go upstream, and the fish can go upstream and spawn, and hopefully that'll increase the populations of fish. It's also something that we want to work with local fishermen and trappers on this coming year, is to see how we can improve the river system after the dam has been removed. I'm kind of bouncing all around here because there's a lot of things that we want to do, and a lot of things that we're trying to do. I think it's all a testimony to all of the staff that are within the Environment Division. They're all very dedicated Akwesaslono. Their hearts and their roots are here in the community, and they're all, I think, experts in their field, and they're doing a fantastic job to try to protect, preserve, and restore the environment for this community. And I have a pretty easy job sometimes because I just try to help them to do their job and just say, go ahead, go and do what you think is the best. And so I think that's what our focus is going to be in the future, is to try to look at how to restore these natural systems, how to bring back our native food and our native diet, how to make the community healthier again, because environmental contamination has really had a tremendous toll on this community. We need to try to get back towards a more healthy diet, more healthy activities and lifestyle. And I'm really optimistic because I see that even though takes a long time, I see that the rivers are getting cleaner, the air is getting cleaner, the land is getting cleaner, the fish and the wildlife are getting cleaner. There's still a ways to go, but I think that we're moving in the right direction. Okay, now,